Hi there. So today I want to talk about competitiveness and I want to explain what it is, where we are, what we need to do. Competitiveness between nations was explored thoroughly by a whole group of people, including Michael Porter many years ago. And what they concluded was that we need to understand this in a powerful way because it really affects the livelihoods that we all have. And so they developed this model. Michael Porter in particular did a huge amount of work here in Canada, but also around the world. And he said, look, you've got to look at, do we have the right kind of institutions to enable competitiveness? Do we have the right infrastructure, transport infrastructure, technology infrastructure, social infrastructure, healthcare? Do we have that right kind of infrastructure? Are we building the right kind of microeconomic environment that supports entrepreneurs and innovators and company growth? Do we have really good health and education systems? Do we have good, efficient ways of getting to global markets? Alberta, for example, which is where I live, we're landlocked, and so we have to think about transport infrastructures. And our big challenge, for example, over the last 20 years has been getting oil and gas from here to markets in demand, especially China. But it's the same with other products like forestry products. The cost of transport are something like 38 to 42% of the cost of all wood products leaving Alberta to get to international markets. Is our labour market ready and efficient and productive? And we did some work last week on productivity, and the answer to that is no. We could be much better at productivity, but we also have other issues in the labour market, like the skills gap, which has a big impact on the ability of a place like Ontario to really get its companies going. Do we have good financial markets, in particular good venture capital markets? And the answer to that is kind of. We have very good financial institutions. Our banks are some of the best in the world in terms of their survivorship. If you look at the stress test that the World Economic Forum and IMF have done on the banking systems, Canada comes out very well. But we have weak venture capital infrastructure. It's been getting better, but it's still a problem. How ready are we with technology? Something like 30% of rural Canadians don't have access to affordable broadband. Indigenous communities, particularly on reserve, don't have access to affordable broadband. So the answer to that question is there's a lot more work to do. What size of market is there? Part of the problem we have is Canada's such a tiny market for anybody to survive in this place. So with just a small number of people able to buy, we have to start looking at global markets to be successful as companies. Do we have the kind of management sophistication, business sophistication to get to scale? It's very interesting that we only have a small number of companies that have raised up to $1 billion in market cap through private equity and through their own efforts because of the management skills of a variety of people. In fact, some colleagues and I did a piece of work 5 years ago looking at the strategic intentions of technology company owners, of which I'm one, and they asked the question, what's your kind of exit strategy? And I answered, I don't have one. My strategy is to grow the business. 90% of my peers, the other chief executives that were being interviewed, said, we hope to get bought out reasonably quickly by a large American or Chinese or foreign company. That was their strategy. Build a business and sell. So we don't have a mindset that says my job is to get to be a $10 billion company. No. My job is to get to a point where somebody else will give me a lot of money so I can move to Vancouver. That's essentially the business. And then the last kind of issue is, do we have terrific innovation capabilities? And our answer to that is not really. We're extremely good at having inventions, but that's not the same as innovation. We'll talk more about that in another episode of this series, but I think The measure of innovation is products to market and growth of those products in the market and how long they stay in the market. And what Canada's really good at is invention. We punch way above our weight in terms of patent filing, in terms of startups and so on. But the real challenge is, do those startups survive? Do those patents generate wealth? And the answer is, yeah, well, if they do, it's generally somewhere else. Now, each year, the World Economic Forum looks at the competitiveness of 118 nations around the world and asks the question, where are you? And the current answer to that, at 2019, when they last did this full review, we were 14th. Sounds all right. Not really. We used to be 8th. The World Economic Forum uses the rigor of the items I've just described to assess these countries. And we keep falling down that catalogue. We're behind countries like Singapore, the US, Hong Kong, Netherlands, Switzerland, Japan, Germany, Sweden, UK, Denmark, Finland, Taiwan, and South Korea. It's very interesting that all the Nordic countries are ahead of us. They're smaller. Finland is about the same size as Alberta in terms of population. But they punch way, way above their weight on all the indicators I just talked about. Now, in 2019, IMD, which is another organization, also does a competitive ranking. And we placed 13th that year. Not bad. But the same problems that the World Economic Forum found were also found by IMD. I'll tell you what they are in a minute. Now, in 2020, they did it again, and we did better. Not because our position on the key variables had changed, but others had got worse. So some economies fell, like the UAE, the US, Finland, Qatar, Luxembourg, all dropped down, enabling us, who essentially have stayed the same on the measures, to become 8th. Now, why are we kind of having a problem with competitiveness? Well, the biggest single problem is our innovation capacity, and more specifically, the ability of firms in Canada to absorb innovation. It's a real problem. And it's a problem because of the structure of our economy. Give a thought to these numbers I'm about to give you. How many small companies with less than 100 employees are there? 100 employees are there in Canada? And the answer is 1.2 million. How many medium-sized companies do we have? Those with between 100 and 500 employees. 23,000. How many big employers do we have? Companies that are really large and that get stuff done. Those with 501 or more employees. Well, 3,000. We're a nation of small firms. 76% of our companies in this country employ less than 10 people. And so they have very little capacity to absorb innovation, very little capacity to change radically and get to big markets, very little capacity to grow the business. So this means that we have a poor microeconomic environment. We can't get companies to grow. And one of the reasons for that is we have poor business sophistication. Not many serial entrepreneurs, not many people who failed a couple of times and then built back and really got powerful companies going. And we're slow at technology innovation and its use and adoption for productivity. We have low productivity and we're poor at managing supply chains. So, what do we need to do? Well, let's first of all talk about why all this matters. Well, one of the reasons is that in order to grow our economy and build the lifestyles and support our communities and support our healthcare and education system, we need to stay competitive, because other people will take our work, other people will take our jobs, other people will produce the goods and services that we should be producing to sustain our communities. The second reason is that the more competitive we are and the more productive we are as organizations, then the more attractive we are to highly qualified people. And highly qualified people pay higher taxes, and those taxes support all the things that we value in this great country. And so we need to grow the economy and sustain its growth, because we want really great well-being for our people, really powerful and strong communities, really effective public organizations. And this should be one of the greatest places to live on earth. And we do get very good positions on those rankings of best place to be, best place for health, and so on. And the other reason this matters is because without innovation, we're all going to get stuck. And so we need to turn our ability to create great ideas into products and services that produce wealth for Canadians, not just a few, but for more. So what can we do? Well, we can reduce regulatory complexity. It's a very complicated place, this. And there's far too many regulations. I own 4 or 5 companies. It's just a lot of work just to maintain the records that the government requires for no apparent reasons. We should simplify our tax regimes. We should stop seeing research and development as about investing in university researchers. That's great, and they do wonderful work. My next call is with the Vice President Research at one of the largest universities in the country. And they get over $1 billion a year to do wonderful things. They're on the edge, for example, of a cure for type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So that's wonderful. But we're unlikely to commercialize those things here. And so one of the things we need to think about in terms of R&D is how we strengthen the capacity of our companies and our infrastructure to grab hold of those great R&D ideas and to turn them into wealth and turn them into a competitive advantage. One of the things we could do is to really target some sectors where we see really powerful potential for growth. We have a wonderful agricultural sector in this country, and we need to get it smarter to grow more food for more people around the world and to get it to those markets. So smart agriculture. We have, as I've said, really good banks, but fintech, the use of technology for financial services, will transform that industry. We need to lead some of that. We have really big land masses, wonderful forests, fantastic rivers, wonderful landscapes. So ecosystem services is a big area we might want to invest in. Improving supply chain sustainability and productivity is another area. And the final one is to really push green economy and the green revolution, and to have components of that that are uniquely Canadian. Another thing we should do is invest in literacy. 42% of Canadians in the workforce have literacy levels below those needed to be able to do their jobs fully. And some recent research shows that just a 1% gain in literacy produces a 5% gain in productivity and a 3% gain in GDP. Just think about this for a minute. If we could up the literacy of people at work, which costs very little to do, it's a big investment that produces a return of $54 billion a year. If for just 1% gain in literacy produces $54 billion a year in new GDP. There's a great investment in startups in this country. We're really good at starting up yet another business. And it's going to be small, employing 3 or 4 people, and everybody's going to be happy, and it's all great. And they make a bit of money, but it's nothing significant that will have an impact on the country as a whole. We need to look at ways of growing medium companies to large and small to medium. We need to really focus our efforts on managing capacities for growth and the absorption capacity for innovation. Now, there is a thing called narwhals. In the rest of the world, they're called unicorns, but we're Canadian, we'll call them narwhals. And these are companies that started up and are now seen to be worth over $1 billion in market cap, even though they're privately held. So we have places like Shopify, Lightspeed. Lots of companies that are on the edge of this are things like Slack, Hootsuite, FreshBooks, Element AI, D2L. These are all companies in the Toronto region or in the Toronto-Windsor corridor. They can produce some fantastic opportunities for growth. My friends at D2L, it's a learning management system company, spend $80 million a year on R&D. They are one of the leading learning management systems in the world, and they're still privately held. So we can grow more and more unicorns, which create huge numbers of jobs, have global reach, global markets, and global employment opportunities for Canadians. We need to support our fast-growing venture capital community. We need to strengthen our venture capital systems, especially for the creative industries, because the creative economy is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. In the UK, the creative economies are growing faster than most of the other sectors put together. It's growing 3 times as fast as manufacturing, for example. We need to leverage the energy transition away from oil and gas towards green energies and find the new energy balance in our economy that makes sense for all of us. And we need to make broadband available to every house in this country at an affordable rate. That might mean using Tesla's infrastructure, the satellite systems that Elon Musk is putting up into space. We're already doing that in certain parts of rural Canada. We need to strengthen that kind of work. So building back better as a result of the pandemic requires us to focus on productivity and competitiveness and innovation, which will be the next thing I talk about. Now, this is not easy work, and part of the challenge is that many of the companies are really badly hit by the pandemic. If you think about the retail trade, hospitality and tourism, airlines, all badly impacted, and they're going to take many years to come back, and many will never return. I grew up in the restaurant trade. My grandfather was a chef, my mother's brother was a chef, my brother was a chef for a while. And that's a really tough business to survive in anyway. The pandemic has made it almost impossible. So something like 20% of our restaurants are not going to reopen, which is a great shame. But how do we reimagine culinary arts and the position of food in our society and the ways in which we could all leverage the skills that those chefs and cooks have in a new way to create new kinds of work, new kinds of businesses? I think there's lots of things we can do. So reimagining Canada from a competitive landscape is the key to what we have to do. Hope this has been helpful. More next week.